Today, we're diving into a pretty radical idea. What if the shape of everything, from a tiny crystal all the way up to our own bodies, isn't built piece by piece from the bottom up? What if, instead, it all comes from a kind of hidden blueprint? It's a concept called the field law of form, and honestly, to get it, you kind of have to flip your whole view of reality.
So, let's just start with the one sentence that's at the heart of all this. It's a statement that completely flips what we think we know on its head. Reality is not built from parts upward, but filtered from phase downward. I know, it sounds a little strange, right? Filtered from phase, what does that even mean? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack. So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the two competing models, building up versus filtering down. Then we'll get into the wild idea of how time itself can create geometry. We're going to use a really simple analogy, the marble and the bowl, to make sense of a key concept. Then see how this all applies to biology. And finally, we'll put it all together to see the world through this new lens.
All right, first things first, we have to understand the two fundamental ways you can look at how reality gets put together. Are we building with Legos from the ground up, or is something else going on? Okay, so on the left, you've got the standard view, the one we all kind of learn in school. Reality is built up. You start with little bits of matter, those atoms form chemistry, and that chemistry eventually organizes itself into life. Simple enough, but the field law view, over on the right, turns that completely upside down. It says reality is filtered down. It doesn't start with matter at all. It starts with something more abstract, cycles of time. And from those cycles, you get fractions, which define geometry, which then gives us physical form. Totally different starting point. So, if reality is being filtered, you gotta ask, right? What are the rules of this filter? I mean, how in the world do you get from something as abstract as time to something as real as a snowflake or a honeycomb? Let's dig into the logic.
It actually boils down to a pretty elegant three-step process. Step 1, time comes before space. Not just any time, but cycles of duration. Think of it as a fourth dimension. Step 2, you take these cycles and divide them into really simple fractions, a half, a third, a fifth. And when you do that, you create interaction. And then, and this is the absolute kicker, step 3, each of those fractions corresponds directly to a specific, stable geometry.
And we're not talking about some vague relationship here. It's incredibly precise. A simple division of 1/2 gives you 4-fold symmetry, which is a square or a diamond. A division of 1/3 gives you 6-fold symmetry. That's the perfect hexagon you see in honeycombs. 1/5, that creates 10-fold symmetry, which is the basis for spirals and the famous golden ratio. It's like these simple fractions are literally the grammar of geometry.
Okay, so we've got these perfect shapes just popping out of fractions of time. So what? How does that actually shape anything in our world? Well, according to this law, that geometry is the filter. Those stable shapes we just saw, the squares, the hexagons, the spirals, they're not just ideas. They are stable patterns that act like a template, filtering out all the chaos and allowing only these coherent forms to actually crystallize into our 3D world.
This brings us to probably the most important term in this whole idea, the attractor. To make this concept super clear, we're going to use a really simple analogy. Okay, first, let's just get the official science-y definition out of the way. In a field called dynamical systems, an attractor is just the stable pattern that a system naturally settles into. It doesn't matter where it starts, it's always drawn to this stable state. It's a point of equilibrium. But honestly, forget the jargon. The best way, the absolute best way to get this is to just picture a marble rolling around in a bowl. You can drop that marble anywhere you want, on the side, near the top, give it a spin. It doesn't matter. Where does it always end up? Right at the bottom, in the center. The starting point is irrelevant. The shape of the bowl determines the final position. In this picture, the bowl is the attractor. Now, let's plug that simple idea back into the theory. In the field law, these bowls don't exist in our 3D space. They are patterns defined by those cycles in 4D time we talked about. And what gives the bowl its shape? Well, it's those fractions, the half, the third, the fifth. So the attractor is basically a 4D filter. It carves out a stable shape in time, and it makes sure that only those specific coherent geometries can last, while everything else just fades away like noise. This is all really fascinating in a physicsy, abstract way, but what does it have to do with us? You know, with life? This is where things get really wild, because we can apply these exact same ideas directly to biology. So how does matter, get the memo? How does it know what shape to take? Well, in this view, things like water, DNA, and even our own cells are like little antennas. They're phase filters. They are literally listening for the instructions that are already being broadcast by these invisible attractor fields. And then they just follow the instructions. They crystallize that information into the physical stuff we recognize: tissues, organs, entire bodies. They aren't inventing the plan. They're just reading a pre-existing one.
And this just completely changes how we think about DNA. Normally, we see DNA as the author, right? The master architect that writes the entire blueprint for a living thing from scratch. But in the field law view, DNA isn't the author. It's the archivist. The blueprint already exists out there in the field. DNA's job is just to store a copy of that plan, to make sure it can be built reliably over and over again. It doesn't create the pattern. It just makes sure the pattern is repeatable. And you can imagine this has huge implications for how we think about evolution. It suggests that maybe it isn't only about random mutations happening and then being selected. It could also be that sometimes the underlying attractor fields themselves shift their symmetry, the bowl actually changes shape. And when that happens, biology just adapts by listening to the new instructions from that retuned field.
So we've gone on quite a journey here, from the very nature of time itself all the way to the building blocks of life. So what does reality actually look like when you put on these new glasses?
And here we are, right back where we started. But hopefully that sentence means a whole lot more now. Let's just let it sink in one more time. Reality is not built up from parts, but filtered down from phase. You could almost picture it as this grand, beautiful cascade. It all starts with time, which fractions itself into geometry. That geometry then acts as a filter to create form. That form crystallizes and becomes what we call life. And maybe, just maybe, consciousness itself is what emerges when there's a perfect resonance across all of these scales, when the patterns of the cell and the body and the cosmos all hum together in one coherent symphony.
So, we'll just leave you with this one final thought to ponder. What if reality isn't something we have to build from scratch? What if it's more like a vast radio broadcast, a symphony of information that's already playing, and our job is simply to learn how to tune into it?